Welcome to the Lawyers and Law-Related Career Panel. Maybe we'll get started. We invite folks to introduce yourselves if you like, name, pronouns, location in the chat, and feel free to pop any questions you might have as we're going anytime in the chat. We'll also have a dedicated time towards the end for Q&A, and if we have a relatively small audience, we'd be happy to have folks on mute and ask their questions verbally as well. Maybe we'll get started with a round of introductions of the panelists. And so I'll get started. I'm Jay Monteverde. My pronouns are he, him. I'm located in Washington, D.C., and I'll be moderating this esteemed panel on lawyers and law-related careers. I used to practice environmental enforcement and public interest law in the Illinois Attorney General's office. I later sort of migrated geographically as well as in legal practice to careers around movement building, grassroots empowerment, and the sort of nexus of organizing and law, and that's where I am today. I'm a board member of and co-founder of one of PowerShift Network's member organizations, Breach Collective, and I'm also the program director of the U.S. Environmental Justice Program at the organization called NAMATI. Let me pass it to Rosalie.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Jay. Hi, everyone. Sorry for my dog in the background there. She goes nuts every time I get on a Zoom call. Hi, everyone. I'm an attorney with the Environmental Defense Fund, working on EDF's climate and clean air team. I'm based in Colorado. I've been with EDF for about 5 years now. My work focuses on reducing methane and other harmful air pollution from the oil and gas sector. So as many of you might know, methane is a really powerful greenhouse gas. It's responsible for a major chunk of the global warming that we're experiencing today. And the oil and gas sector is the largest industrial source of methane pollution in the United States. And along with methane, oil and gas wells also emit other harmful local air pollution like volatile organic compounds that help form smog, and hazardous air pollutants like cancer-causing benzene in communities all across the country, including here in Colorado. Where I live in Denver, we frequently experience ozone alerts for unhealthy smog levels caused by pollution from oil and gas development just a little bit north of the city. So it's definitely a personal area for me. And so maybe I'll pause there and looking forward to the discussion today.
Maybe Carolina next.
Thank you, Jay. Hi, everyone. My name is Carolina Rubio Mcwright, and I am an immigrant, an immigration lawyer, and an artist, activist. I think I have a lot of hats, and I was able to found an organization called Touching Land, where I teach know your rights to immigrants through clay, textiles, and food. My work has taken me to the border a lot lately in the last couple of years, and I do a lot of work with Indigenous communities and also try to push concepts of climate migration with the United Nations, and understanding that accountability has to be had on behalf of the US on the zero tolerance policy. So I don't practice law unless I'm inside detention centers. Otherwise, I'm teaching it to undocumented populations in around New York. I forgot to say that I'm in Brooklyn. So yeah, that's about it. So I'll pass it back to Jay.
Carolina. Jill.
Hey everybody, I am Jill Kaiser. I use the pronouns she, her. I'm an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. And just really appreciate everybody being here today. I know it's been an intense last couple of hours, so as we're gearing up for this panel, I know a lot of us may not have been thinking about the panel. So just wanted to put that out there. I practice energy law, so I do a lot of clean energy advocacy, advocating for energy efficiency and solar before state regulatory agencies like public service commissions. Oh, and I've been at SELC for about 6 years, and before that I was in Oakland, California, doing some volunteer attorney work with an environmental justice nonprofit.
And Don.
Hi, everybody. My name is Don. I'm a prosecutor in Las Vegas. Before that, I was with the Democratic Party and other related 501c4s for about 7 years. I actually also partially worked for the EDF in California, actually. So great to be here.
Thanks, Don, and thank you, everyone. So maybe to start out, a pretty open-ended question, maybe a round robin. What made you decide to become a lawyer, or what was it that drew you in this direction professionally? Maybe let's start with reverse of what we just did, Don.
Oh, yes. When I was a kid, and to be clear, I'm a prosecutor, but I mainly do domestic violence cases. So when I could go on and many hours about the caseload here, but to answer your question, when I saw what was happening in the Rodney King videotapes, that's kind of heartbreaking there. And then the riots that occurred after that, your sense of justice gets totally influenced by those types of videos. And so to tell you the truth, I had many hats before going to law school, but that kind of drew me in when meeting some other professors that told me like, oh, this might be a good idea for your activism, when you're in college, 2019, 18, like they might need good people. So that's what drew me into law school.
Jill?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty slow decision to go to law school. I studied environmental issues in undergrad and didn't go right to law school. I took some time off and worked a lot of random jobs and thought about what to do with my future. And one of the jobs that I had, I worked as a receptionist at a law firm and just was considering grad school and potentially law school. And I just happened to work with a bunch of lawyers that really liked their jobs, and it seemed like a pretty attractive career path for me. And it wasn't even till I was in law school for a couple of years that I knew I wanted to do environmental law. So just kind of trying different things out and landed in the law.
I think Carolina's next.
Yeah. So I am the daughter of lawyers. And so we're all lawyers. We're 3 kids and everybody's a lawyer. So there was like a lot of pressure there. They practice IP law and I didn't want to come close to that. I wanted to be around people. I wanted to make change. And like Ron, I thought about working as a prosecutor. I grew up in Colombia, witnessing a lot of injustice in every way. And so I thought I wanted to be a prosecutor until I moved to the US, and then I studied law in Oklahoma. And I started understanding some of the law, and I immediately started volunteering at the public defender's office. And so that, I think my understanding of systems is what I wanted, what attracted me to accountability, all these things that actually I found the law doesn't really have, at least for people of color, minorities, and the environment and everything. So it's been really, really wonderful to use law as a tool. And sort of, there's many ways in which you can use your law degree, which is something that I'm excited to tell people, because I think everybody thinks the lawyer is like this person that goes to work and is in court, and there's so many different ways that you can be a lawyer. So I think that that also attracted me and made me want to become a lawyer, because it felt like I could have a lot of tools in my toolkit that would enable me to do lots of things in the world, and especially to generate the change for the world that I want to see. Yeah.
And just for everyone's benefit, Carolina, what's IP law?
Oh, sorry. So it's intellectual property. So it's really boring stuff. Basically, no, I'm just kidding. But it's basically a lot of like submitting paperwork and like, I mean, there's some fun stuff. There's also like it's trademarks and also patents. So there's a lot of fun things in patents, but I don't think it's a lot of people type of law. So yeah.
Rosalie.
Thank you. Yeah, I really agree with what Carolina just said about the law, using law as a tool. What kind of drew me to the law is sort of the framework that it provides for, achieving different goals and objectives, and, particularly in the environmental space, there's no sort of set answer to any problem or challenge in the law. There's this framework, and you can do sort of different things within that. But to me, it really seemed like a career that involves a lot of problem solving and sort of creative thinking about how you can use the tools that exist in the law to sort of push change, and so that's kind of what drew me to it.
And picking up on a thread that I think Carolina you mentioned, so as those of us who've gone to law school are familiar, there tends to be maybe a mainstream track when you're in law school. Like there's a feeling that the legal education points you in a certain direction, especially practicing law, being an attorney in some way. And curious for folks who are not sort of in that focus necessarily on that direct path, what made you sort of consider where you ended up? And for maybe folks who do sort of consider yourselves in that traditional practicing law as an attorney path, did you consider other paths, or how did you end up in the sort of direction or track that you're in? And sort of open it up if anyone would like to respond to either of those.
Yeah, I think I'll echo some of what Carolina said. I really wanted to work with people, or more directly with communities. And so I think it was in my second year of law school, I started to stress a little bit that my whole job might be just like moving buckets of money around or something like that. And I was like, well, that's really not what I want to do. And if that's what it looks like, I don't want to be a lawyer. And it wasn't until I did an environmental law clinic that I started to see some different types of legal careers, and not just litigation, but also policy work and different ways to use my law degree, that I started to feel like it was a career that I could really identify with and find my own path with.
Anyone else?
I mean, I could jump in, Jay. It's okay. So with a law degree, it opens an extreme amount of doors. The practice of law, like going to court every day, will test you in ways that you never thought possible, I think would be a light way of putting it. And then also having to, well, to give you context, when I was working with the Democratic Party, I was mostly an organizer. So you're working approximately 90 hours a week, making 300 to 600 phone calls a day and trying to recruit. If you work with any state entity, your hours will significantly go down. But depending if you're doing a law firm, the type of law firm that you're with, those numbers will be exceptional as well. 80 hours, 70 hours work weeks. But the, because of essentially attorney-client privilege or anything like that, you can't really, I can't go necessarily, or someone else who works at a law firm can't necessarily go into the super details, but reading and writing. I always like to think of law when I, like first year of law school or even beforehand, it's a competition storytelling, if that makes sense. But there's no score. It's a win or lose situation every single time. And, failure means that your client's going to lose or something like that. So yeah, it's been fun. If you're looking for a challenging career, it's beautiful. You'll never have a boring day. But yeah, it's been great.
I'll jump in to counter that. No, I'm just kidding. But I agree. I think that you have to be realistic with the cost of law school as well. I think that that's something that nobody speaks about. And when you're in the movement and you're organizing, it's a lot of work, and it might not be an amazing pay money wise, and that's how our world works, right? Versus the gratitude that you feel from working a job that you love. So for me, I loved working in the public defender's office, but it was very heavy emotionally. It was just taxing in a way that I just really couldn't. It wasn't exactly like I loved it, but I also loved art because I'm also an artist. That's my dog. And so I wanted to find something where I could have a lot of impact in the community. And it felt like with immigration cases, sure, I was having an impact on one person, but I wanted to bring a bigger impact on communities that were really invisible. And so the law degree has been amazing because it's given me a voice in spaces where I normally wouldn't have a voice if I didn't have the law degree. And so it's given me access, but I was able to come up with something that worked where I could still be artistic, empower people, and use my law degree in a creative way. So much like Rosalie said, she finds that it's, for me, arts and law are very much the same. You just have different materials. You might have paint, you might have other things, but you're composing something the same way that you're composing a case or a presentation, or you're challenging a policy. So I think that, in order for you to be as effective as you can be, you have to be very creative, especially in the environmental space when you're challenging very archaic systems and you're trying to bring new science into the forefront. So I think it's been an amazing tool, and it's something I feel like sometimes we get boxed, and you have to think outside the box. You can be a lawyer, you can be a scientist, you can be all of these amazing things and live sort of in the estuary where there's more fertility and ability to imagine the possibilities in the world.
Other thoughts on that question? Another question. Can you tell us about a really defining moment for you in your work, or a moment that, I'd add a second piece to that, or a moment that made you, really happy about what you're doing, or really sort of satisfied, fulfilled with what you're doing? Anyone can jump in, or are we the stereotype of miserable lawyers?
No, Jay, I think the pathway into happiness, I mean, to tell you the truth, getting through first year, 1L situation, that has to be like, if you have to find that moment of happiness there, because if you're not happy in school, you're never going to be happy outside of school. I think I think, well, there's the answer we always typically answer, but I think it's at at school for me, the music school was right next to the law school in Syracuse. In fact, you could hear opera being practiced if you're at the law school. Me being me, I was a band nerd in high school. I went over there, sat in on the drum set, like, you know, a couple $1,000 drum set. They're music majors, right? And just started to like ask like one of the other teachers, like, hey, is it cool if I sit in? And he was a little bit older, and he was like, yeah, sure, whatever, thinking that I was a student there. And so I was part of a jazz improv over there. But the work-life balance, you have to learn that when you're 1L, and you'll see your classmates sort of like wig out, you know, stress, high anxiety, all of the above. And when you could feel like you're riding a wave, like surfing, then you're like, wow, this is going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay. That was a fulfilling moment. But to answer your question directly, it's when you start understanding the material and learning how to craft an argument and win, especially because when you start to realize that there's forces in law that are larger than, you know, anything you've seen, like Supreme Court cases level. I had a teacher that argued a motion, you know, in New York for, you know, she was an appellate attorney. And, you know, when you start to see that it's competition, storytelling, when you connect the dots on everything, then, you know, the lights will go on in your brain and be enlightened about the practice of law. So, yeah.
Others?
I guess, you know, I don't know if this is exactly what you're getting at, Jay, but a super defining moment for me was like getting my first real public interest environmental law job. It was something I really wanted to do, and it's a hard field to break into. And so the first like interview I had that went really well, and I wasn't in law school, I was out of law school, and I was trying to get into that field. And so when I got my first job offer in Atlanta at Emory's Environmental Law Clinic, I was just really happy because I was going to have the opportunity to do work that was really important to me. And it was kind of that first step that opened a lot of doors to follow.
Yeah. So something for me that's been maybe defining, although not necessarily happy, but you know, for many of the issues that I work on can feel somewhat abstract in terms of being legal issues of administrative law, how EPA is formulating a policy, and you know, getting really into the details of that policy and the legal support for it. So it can feel a bit abstract in that sense, but it's you know, these are also like policies that have huge impacts on millions of people's lives, and so one way that I've gotten to see that is through public hearings and just the public process that many of these sort of administrative efforts entail. So a few years ago, there was a public hearing that the EPA held on what was going to be a rollback proposed by the Trump administration of federal oil and gas, climate and air standards. So the administration had proposed to weaken these protections for the hundreds of thousands of oil and gas wells that exist across the country. And at that hearing, people from across the country testified about, you know, the impacts of this pollution on their lives. There were kids there who had been exposed to benzene at their schools in Pennsylvania. There were tribal members living on the Fort Berthold Reservation in North Dakota who, you know, experienced constant oil and gas flaring and venting and constant exposure to pollution, the pollution in that way. And so, you know, having those moments where the sort of maybe abstract work that you're doing, you see how it can translate into policies and things that affect people's lives directly is something that's been definitely meaningful for me.
Another sort of round robin question. What do you wish you had known about either going into law-related career or going to law school sooner than you found out? What do you wish you had known sooner?
I'll dive in and also answer Alondra's question a little bit on the emotional, how taxing it is. You know, law school was built by white men, and it carries a very patriarchal energy. It's, I feel like I had to, I walked into law school my first day wearing this like poodle pink skirt, all like, yay, in law school. And as soon as my first day was over, I never saw pink again. And it's still not part of like my language, because I understood that if I wanted to survive law school and the system, I had to act and be much more aggressive than I am by nature, because that sort of is how it is. Just like Don was saying, I mean, I was the only Latina in my class. And so they don't teach you boundaries. They don't teach you how to build boundaries with your clients. Or so I became friends with a man that is now in death row, and he is one of my closest friends. And I had more in common with a man that was in prison than I did with any of my peers or anybody in Oklahoma. So I did not follow boundaries, and I'm glad I didn't. But I wish somebody would have in this situation, because I learned a lot. And I think it was important for both of us, for survival, to have this relationship and this like friendship and acknowledgement of each other. But you can't have that type of relationship with every client. And you have to draw lines, otherwise you will be emotionally like drained, and it's really hard to see the line, especially if you're really emotional and an empath, which I of course am. So I think that I wish somebody would have taught me, you have to learn how to create boundaries between your clients, and you can't cross that line, because everybody needs help, and you can't just be devoted to one case. You have to working, you have to keep in mind that if we think of abolition of certain systems, like you can't help that one person, but you have to create a system where it's sustainable, and you have to see yourself as a lawyer as a system that needs to be sustainable. And so as you're working with clients, I wish somebody had taught me how to create emotional and social and everything boundaries, so that I could save my energy, and I could, like that's a reason why I don't practice criminal law. Like I get really, really involved, and it's really hard for me to draw lines. So I learned that this is not something that I can do right now. Even if I had the tools, I get to invest it, because the criminal justice system is basically extended slavery. So I wish somebody had taught me boundaries at a much earlier time.
That's really powerful, Catalina. Others?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think I wish that I had learned, and maybe similar to thinking about what law school is and who built it and what skills they tell you are needed to be successful as a lawyer. I wish that I had realized earlier that you don't have to be the best legal writer or the best public speaker or the best everything to be successful. Like we're all bringing very different skills to the table. And I think I spent too many years panicking that I wasn't good enough at certain things, even though like I'm a great lawyer and I bring a lot of things to the table that my colleagues don't, or, and the same with them. And it's all about how you're complementing each other as a team. So I guess like, remember that you're good enough and you're smart enough and you're bringing enough to the table, and don't panic about things that feel like inadequacies. Like I think it's easy to start thinking about that, especially in law school where they're like ranking you and it's very competitive. So try not to buy into that. And if you know you're on the right path, just trust yourself and your own instincts.
Others? Done? Was that?
I thought Jill was going next. Okay. Go ahead, Jill, if you want to talk. It's okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, all of the above. I mean, I graduated probably 10 years ago now. I think it's 2011 or 2012. I don't remember exactly. Wait, it's 2000, no, 2012, excuse me. Man, there's so many guides online on how to succeed, so many books nowadays. Whole briefing notes, manual guides that go into the stratosphere, thousands of pages on how to succeed. Find all of those and read them all. The big thing that I learned that wasn't in those books, that helped me a lot in the summer. Well, I started to realize like, okay, maybe I should check these out more in my 1L year, read those prior to, but the one thing that's not in those books, which I think everybody touched on, is that work-life balance and not being ready for essentially systems that are, you may not realize exist, or they only exist. How can I say this? Like the dark side forces of the world, they exist concretely, and you will meet members of that class in school, and to see face to face with some of those members of that class, it's startling. It's absolutely startling. So be prepared to enter competitive storytelling, competitive everything when you get to school. It's a great experience if you're aware, but it is absolutely harrowing if you don't have anybody to help you. And like for also the Latin American Law Students Association, the president at the time, once my first meeting, like, oh, join student groups and everything. He wrote 21 on there, and I was like, oh, okay, so like on the board, and he circled 2 and 1, and he said that this Victor is his name. Victor said that 2 is the number of percentage of Latinos in law school, and 1 is the amount of overall lawyers practicing who currently hold licenses. And that shocked me and motivated the hell out of me to work harder and be more focused. But I mean, you will see those systems not only in practice, but the practical life. So, but yeah, the finding a work-life balance and focusing when on school.
I'll jump in with one thing I wish I knew sooner. I went into law school, went in a legal career direction, knowing that I wanted to use it as a tool for justice, and that the end is justice, or advancing human rights, or helping make people's lives better, or make communities' lives better. But something happens in law school where you end up buying into a sort of like legal industrial complex, for lack of a better way to say it. Like you really believe, okay, the law is a thing, like it's an institution. And you might know, I knew intellectually or sort of logically that the law is created by people in privilege, white people, at least our modern legal system, especially in the US. And it comes from a very particular racist, et cetera, place. Like, all that cognitively, but you still buy into thinking, okay, if I can just like convince a good judge who wants to do the right thing, like I can work within the bounds of this complex and I can push it in the right direction. Where my career has taken me is, and this is of course personal opinion, where my career has taken me is realizing that law is sort of self-perpetuating as a institution. And for example, there are areas of law, environmental law is a classical one, where it's gotten further and further divorced from or separated from the sort of the point. And again, I really emphasize as an opinion that, you know, communities, for people in impacted communities, for people who are at the front lines of the climate crisis or legacy pollution or current ongoing pollution, and I think we all know that those are low-income communities of color, their ability to access the knowledge and to understand this regulatory system and this entire framework that is directly impacting their lives is, over the years and decades, has gotten more and more difficult. So even as environmental law has become, supposed to have become more protective of the environment overall and supposed to have actually advanced, you know, cleaner air, cleaner water, but people who need to actually make it have meaning because there is a smokestack out their window, their ability to actually interact directly with that in ways like folks have mentioned before, like permitting hearings or public commenting procedures, like the learning curve to get into those spaces and to meaningfully participate in those spaces and to use regulations as community members to your own benefit is extremely, like, there's just like a huge step, and it needs folks like the folks on this panel to bring law closer to communities and to work with communities to sort of like bridge that gap. And I think that's something that several folks have spoken to, several of the panelists have spoken to, where like working with communities or having that people connection in your legal work or in your law related work. So that's something that I really wish I had known earlier, or sort of really wrapped my brain around in a sort of emotional way or in a sort of really visceral way. Any other thoughts from the panel on this question? I'd like to turn to audience questions, if not. Given today, and given the Chauvin verdict, Belle's question about how abolition intersects with your work is one that I'd like to turn to real quick if any panelists have thoughts. So the question is, I'm curious how abolition intersects with your work. I don't want to work for the government, and also to some extent, you have to work within the very systems you are fighting against. I'm curious if anyone, regardless of your current job, has thoughts on that. Please.
I'll start. I mean, abolition is something that I think, like, most lawyers are like, you know, it's like frightening to think of abolition to some degree. I think that, you know, I have a unique way of seeing abolition, and I see it more as transformation. I'll give you an example. We're working right now, we're transforming a corrections bus into a civic engagement bus. I'm an artist, so I work in this field, and half of the people we're working with were like, let's beat the crap out of that thing, let's burn it and do, you know, and it was this idea of destruction, right? I look at nature a lot to sort of understand. I look at, you know, I'm a beekeeper. I look at hives and how they think about collectiveness and like what's best for everybody. I think that you can work and do abolition work and include the government, because the government is of the people. I know this is not going to be popular, but to me, it's like, if you look at mycelium or mushrooms, you know, the system was created, like we said, by white supremacist white people that did not include, you know, immigration, for instance, was drafted. There was not a single woman inside the room when the immigration code was drafted. There were only 15 women in the room and no immigrants. And they were all business owners that had interests, specific interests, which is why no businesses are held accountable about that. But I think there is a way to work with government, as long as, you know, as Jay was saying, as long as we have accessibility and we have diversity in these positions, I think that given the last 4 years of this presidency, there's been a lot of movement, and people are realizing that democracy, or our idea of democracy, is in our hands. So I think there is space to think of, we're working right now with the city of New York, and like, who would have thought that they would give us a corrections bus? But it's happening. And so there is a space for healing and for thinking in a creative way and an innovative way, so that we don't want to erase I think about it as you get hurt and you have sort of like a scar, right? You want to always forget that system did not work, and that we're not doing that again. And so I think that that's sort of my the way that I see the possibility of abolition inside government, and it's through people getting into government and changing the framework. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
Not at all. Any other thoughts?
I guess I would also just say, like I struggle, so I work in a lot of coalitions with a lot of different partners, and some are like racial justice advocates that are on the ground, and they are working like very directly to change systems. And sometimes like it has been a struggle for me to like be working in the system and feeling like I'm not doing enough, or this isn't aggressive enough. But at the same time, like a lot of the folks I work directly with like have helped me gain confidence and understanding that like we're all playing these different roles, and we're having conversations like behind the scenes about like what levers they're pulling and what levers I have to pull. And some of the change that I can help create is very incremental, and some of the change that they're going to help create will be much bigger, but it might take more time in some respects. So I think it's all just remembering that it's not just like the individual tasks that you're performing in your job, like we're all operating as a broader network for change.
Other thoughts? Looking through the chat for additional questions.
Oh, wait. Yeah,
Oh.
the funny thing that one of my teachers, she was the co-authors for Race on the Law book, the brown one. I don't know if you've seen it, but anyhow, she said like if you ever have any problems, the best thing to do is just sue for it on constitutionality. So if you're like you want to affect change, it might take a couple years, but you'll get a Supreme Court case out of it. So that will be definitely in the on the radar screens. So yeah.
There was a question from Miguel that's a particular legal question. I'm not sure if anyone would like to touch on it. The climate crisis is creating millions of climate refugees that are not being included in legal systems. Can anyone speak to how climate refugees can be included in frameworks of international law? From your experience, what's the relationship between US legal systems and international law? Would anyone care to touch on that?
I feel like that's Carolina's, I think you said something about that. I will say quickly before I go international, working in the South, there's a lot of remnants from slavery where heirs property is a big problem. So even with the climate change impacts we're facing in a lot of our, coastal areas and not even in coastal areas, I think Black and Brown communities are disproportionately impacted in a whole bunch of ways, but one of them is through our current legal system and lack of ownership in the way that our law recognizes. So I'll just say like there's definitely problems internationally, but we also have like a domestic crisis too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people are aware of the fact that a lot of the refugees we've had in the last 5 years are actually climate refugees. my last couple of trips down to the border working inside detention centers, a lot of them are climate refugees, and it's already happening. There's an amazing organization called Territorial Empathy, and they do mapping through technology. They were able to actually map the last 10 years of migration, where people are coming from. And you could see the correlation between natural disasters and migration. I mean, it's unbelievable how incredibly succinct this app is at showing you that these are mostly climate refugees. The issue with international law is we haven't ratified a lot of treatises and international law that other nations have. I mean, we don't even recognize rights of children or of women in this country. So we're actually organizing, and we need youth right now with certain allies in the United Nations, where we're trying to ratify some of those laws and force this government to comply and to agree to those laws, so that this country can be held accountable for, just making sure that zero tolerance policy will not happen again, and that it won't happen. For me, working with the UN and advocates, it's making sure that the US is held accountable and that no other nation follows the separation of children as an example, right? Especially as again, climate refugees is a fact, and it's going to happen. So I think we need to start addressing migration more in those terms and bring it to the climate sort of sphere, so that we can, there's more allyship, and the intersectionality of these issues is more clear. There's a lot of work to be done there, and I don't think people connect the two. So it's an important question.
There was a case, I'm not sure if Miguel or others are familiar, there was a recent case on immigrants to New Zealand who tried to claim refugee status because of explicitly claiming because of climate, and because they were Pacific Islanders, if I'm remembering right, and their home islands were falling below the rising sea level, and they lost. But the decision it sort of leaves open the question whether existing refugee law can be interpreted. Wait a few years, and when they really don't have a home or something like that, then existing refugee law could be interpreted to include climate refugees. But that, I think to Carolina's point, like that doesn't account, like how are you going to prove that in situations where, for example, it's a drought, and then all the country's farmers are fleeing or subject to harassment by gangs, and the public security in your home country is really terrible, and you end up migrating halfway across continents for that reason. So yeah, the climate refugee question is really complicated, and it's so intersecting that it's very woefully poorly covered. Looking through the questions. Alondra's more recent question. As a Latina female, I would love to hear more on the women's experience in a white and male-dominated field, including your experiences in law school and government. What tips do you have for other women of color interested in law?
I think Jill or Rosalie could maybe talk, because they are women, right? And you guys could talk about that part.
Yeah, well, in law school, definitely we touched on how the way that the system is set up. Like, I would definitely say it's hyper competitive and kind of aggressive in the way that some of the classes are taught and things like that. But in the practice of law, yeah, there's been a lot of moments where I've been like, wow, there are a lot of old white men in the room, and I'm, the only woman. Or when I get up, if someone comments on how, what you're wearing, or if you're emotional in a certain respect. I think that can often be tough. There's definitely been some pretty uncomfortable experiences, but at the same time, there's been a lot of great experiences. I think I bring a lot to the table because I'm a woman. I can't speak to being a woman of color, but definitely being a woman and sometimes the only woman in the room, especially on energy issues. There's a lot of, men that work in solar and a lot of those more technical fields. I think some of that's shifting, but yeah, I think there are challenging moments, but for me, the pros have outweighed the cons, and I found that people have been really, at least the people I work with, have been really open and receptive, and all of that. I'll say, a lot of the elected officials I work with before utilities commissions, you can tell they're struggling sometimes, I think, with the shift to seeing more and more women lawyers practicing before them, and I think it's yeah.
Yeah, maybe just building a little bit on what you just said, Jill. I think very much agree with sort of the set of challenges that you laid out, especially in law school. I think that's where, for me, it was sort of most notable, the system of the Socratic method, which just calling on people blindly in class to provide an answer to a detailed legal question is something that terrified me and still terrifies me a little bit. But, since, starting in law school, and then since then, something that I found really helpful and has really, deepened over the years is sort of building your own kind of community within your profession, whether it's the law or elsewhere, and finding sort of that support network of people who, understand the challenges that you face and can sort of support you and you support them throughout sort of the process that you're going through. And I think one thing that I've loved about my current job is my team is predominantly women that I work on, and so it feels like in that way, a very supportive community to sort of base my advocacy in, and it's easy to talk to a group of people who understand the issues. So I think that community piece is sort of one thing that's critical throughout.
I'll add one quick piece. The number of Latina women working in activism is actually quite small. And I would say to not get discouraged if certain, especially ethical tests and so on, don't feel like if you fail them, because I find we fail those a lot as Latinas. I don't know why. I think it's really hard. The ethics around law are sometimes so they don't feel great in your body or in your mind, because they just, again, are not built for us. These spaces are not built for us. So they feel very uncomfortable. So just learn to try and get the emotion out and stick to facts. That is, I think, what has helped me. And the tip has helped other women that have had trouble, other women of color that have had trouble with these tests specifically. And you have a lot to offer, and we need more of you. So I wouldn't get discouraged. I would find community. I would lean into, get a mentor if you can, because that's how I was protected. My career services actually told me that I would never get a job because I wasn't a citizen. And she shut her door in my face. And it was the two people of color in the faculty that were the people that helped me. So lean into the people that, into that faculty, and even prisoners like I did.
And be mindful of the time, and since this is a Power Shift Network climate justice panel, wanted to turn to Harry's question real quick. What are some of the most exciting ways you see lawyers trying to advance climate justice right now? Can you recommend any websites, publications, or books that help us learn more about how lawyers have advanced or are advancing climate justice? I'll take a quick crack and then invite others. So there are various lawsuits going on in the US or internationally that are sort of climate law, climate litigation. They vary. They could be, for example, youth suing the US government. The hashtag is YouthVGov if folks haven't heard of it. 21 youth who are suing the federal government over exacerbating the climate change through burning fossil fuels. They could be local or state governments that are suing energy companies over, again, burning fossil fuels, or consumer fraud because energy companies have spent millions or billions of dollars at this point to convince people that burning fossil fuels is okay, or increase the doubt around climate science, etc. To individual miners or farmers, not miners, farmers who they are suing energy companies for impacting their livelihood. So there's various types of litigation going on in different countries. But I think the much more exciting part is how, and this sort of ties back to something I said earlier, how law is being used more in creative ways, like efforts like Just Transition or Green New Deal, sort of pushing policies, and lawyers being involved in pushing policies that center justice and equity. I'm involved in that work both with Breach Collective as well as in my day job at Namati, or helping local governments that want to get rid of, for example, natural gas. There's a campaign going on in the Pacific Northwest right now around working with local governments that want to close down and phase out natural gas rather than balloon it as a transition fuel, so-called transition fuel. And there are lawyers and other, combined with grassroots activists and grassroots organizers who are working with friendly governments and friendly agencies to help state governments and local governments figure out what are the legal bases for speeding a transition away from natural gas and other fossil fuels. So there's various efforts. Many of them, the ones that have seen the most success, are not strictly litigation. So, and litigation is, it's sort of, it is going on, but it has been slower to move. And sort of marrying that law and organizing, if folks haven't read it, Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything, or other books by Naomi Klein, are really excellent and really articulate well that sort of, the climate justice movement. The law can play a critical role, but the sort of core of it needs to be in grassroots movements and grassroots organizing, grassroots power building.